Number 4. Dancers butchered at the Festival of Toxcatl. It's 1519. The Spanish have muscled their way into Tenochtitlan, one of the largest cities on Earth at that point, bigger than London, bigger than Paris. Cortés temporarily steps out of the city and leaves a man named Pedro de Alvarado in charge. And Alvarado, I still genuinely cannot work out what calculation he was running, looks out at the sacred precinct where hundreds of Aztec nobles and trained ritual dancers have gathered for the Festival of Toxcatl. This was not a small gathering. We're talking the highest-ranking members of Aztec society, priests, nobles, warriors in ceremonial dress. They'd been preparing for months. The costumes alone, feathered, gilded, elaborate, represented years of craft. These were not random civilians. These were the people who held Aztec civilization together culturally and religiously. And they were completely unarmed. You don't bring weapons to a sacred ceremony. Alvarado seals every exit, then sends his men in with swords. What happened next took a few hours. The accounts, and we have both Spanish and indigenous sources, which is actually rare for this period, describe the same scene independently. People trampling each other trying to find an exit that wasn't there. Dancers cut down, still wearing their ceremonial feathers. The Spanish accounts tried to sanitize it. The indigenous accounts, compiled later in documents like the Florentine Codex, do not. They describe the courtyard afterward in terms that are hard to read even now. The soldiers rushed in and attacked the musicians first. They swung their swords and sliced off their hands while they were still playing the instruments. It happened so fast and clinically that their severed hands on the floor were still holding the drumsticks, blood gushing out their wrists. Before the musicians collapsed, the soldiers decapitated them in front of the already horrified crowd. There was an instant stampede. People rushed towards the exit, but it was blocked. They had nowhere to go. The soldiers then advanced systematically, killing nobility after nobility. Ceremonial clothes were stained in blood. The bodies were piled up and pushed to the corners of the arena. It was chaos. Mothers clutched their babies in their arms. The elderly knelt down praying. The youngsters tried to fight them off with their bare hands, but they were no match for swords and spears. The whole thing lasted hours, and the aftermath was a courtyard littered with hundreds of bodies, somewhere between 200 and 600 dead, unarmed. Alvarado's official justification was that he was preventing an uprising. The massacre is what caused the uprising. The full Aztec rebellion that drove the Spanish out of Tenochtitlan, what they'd call La Noche Triste, the Night of Sorrows, ignited the moment word spread from that courtyard. He tried to prevent a fire and dumped oil on everything. And La Noche Triste is exactly where number 3 happens, because what the Spanish witnessed during that retreat haunted their own writers for decades. Number 3. Velázquez sacrificed to idols. Juan Velázquez de León, one of Cortés's most experienced and trusted captains, a man who had survived multiple campaigns, who Cortés relied on for difficult assignments. During the chaos of La Noche Triste, the Spanish fleeing Tenochtitlan at night across the causeways, ambushed from every direction, men drowning in the canals under the weight of looted gold they refused to drop, Velázquez was captured by Aztec warriors. They didn't kill him where they caught him. They took him to the temple of Huitzilopochtli. And here I want to give context because it actually matters. The Aztecs weren't doing this out of random cruelty. In their cosmology, the sun required human blood to keep moving. Captive enemy warriors were considered the most sacred possible offering. Being sacrificed this way was, within their worldview, a theologically significant death. That doesn't make it easier to read, but it explains why they did it publicly and ceremonially, rather than just executing prisoners on the spot. What the Spanish documented, soldiers watching from across the lake as they retreated, unable to do anything, was their comrades being marched up the steep temple steps. The temple of Huitzilopochtli sat atop a pyramid roughly 40 meters high. You could see it from a significant distance across the lake, and the Aztecs made sure it was visible. The ceremony itself involved restraint on the altar stone, a cut below the sternum with an obsidian blade. Obsidian, by the way, is sharper than surgical steel, and the removal of the heart while the person was still alive. Death followed within seconds. The body was then taken down the temple steps. Velázquez was one of the highest-ranking Spanish officers to die this way, and the Aztecs positioned it deliberately, in full view of Cortés and his surviving men who were too far away and too outnumbered to intervene. Bernal Díaz del Castillo, a soldier who was actually present that night, wrote about it decades later in his memoir. The horror still comes through the page completely intact. Cortés watched and could do nothing at all. But if that bothers you, and it should, number 2 is somehow worse, because number 2 involves a man who had to stay conscious through his. Halfway through this, I want to stop for a second. If you're one of the 12 people subscribed to this channel, I mean this genuinely. Thank you. Not in a throwaway way. 12 people showed up before there was any algorithm behind this, any momentum, any reason to click, other than just deciding this was worth your time. You were here when it was nothing. That actually means something to me. Oh, and shout out to my left ventricle. Wink. Okay, back to it. Number 2. Cuauhtémoc, last emperor of the Aztec Empire. He was around 25 years old when he took power, inheriting a city already under siege, already starving, already devastated by a smallpox epidemic that had killed somewhere between a third and half the population. And he fought anyway. He organized the defense of Tenochtitlan through 80 days of brutal urban combat with no food coming in, contaminated water, bodies in the streets. He kept fighting when almost anyone else would have surrendered. When he was finally captured in August 1521, trying to escape by canoe across the lake with a small group, he was brought before Cortés. He reportedly said something along the lines of, "I have done everything I could for my people and my kingdom. I did not do it by choice. Do with me whatever you will." Cortés kept him alive. A living emperor was worth more than a dead one, useful for controlling the remaining population, useful as a symbol of complete Spanish victory. But Cortés also wanted the gold. Before the city fell, the Aztecs had moved enormous quantities of treasure, melted it down, hid it, dropped it in the lake. It was gone, and Cortés wanted to know where. Cuauhtémoc wouldn't say, wouldn't confirm anything existed, sat in silence. So they tied him down and poured oil on the soles of his feet, then held them over open flame. They did the same to his treasurer simultaneously, both men restrained, both being burned at the same time, presumably hoping one would break and pressure the other. The treasurer, at some point during this, turned and looked at Cuauhtémoc. The look on his face, according to the account, was the look of a man approaching his limit. Cuauhtémoc looked back at him and said, "Do you think I am on a bed of roses?" He said nothing else, gave no location, gave nothing. His feet were badly damaged. The accounts suggest he walked with difficulty for the rest of his life. Cortés, to his credit I suppose, eventually stopped the torture. But he kept Cuauhtémoc alive for 4 more years as a prisoner, dragging him along on a grinding expedition to Honduras in 1524, and then in 1525 on a road somewhere in what is now southern Mexico, far from Tenochtitlan, Cortés had him hanged. The stated reason was conspiracy to rebel. The real reason was probably simple. A living former emperor is always going to be a problem eventually. He was around 30 years old. His feet had never properly healed, and he died on a road in the middle of nowhere, nowhere near the city he'd defended until there was nothing left to defend. The torture didn't break him. time and distance, and a rope did.
During La Noche Triste, the Spanish didn't just lose men to the fighting in the canals and causeways. A significant number were captured alive. And the Aztecs, who were winning, let's be clear, this was their victory, took those captives and did exactly what their religion demanded of them after a military triumph. They brought them to the top of the pyramid. Bernal Díaz del Castillo, a soldier who survived that night and wrote about it decades later, described watching from a distance as his companions were dragged up the steep steps of the temple of Huitzilopochtli. He counted. There were around 68 Spanish soldiers and a number of their Tlaxcalan allies taken that night, and the Aztecs processed them one by one. At the top of the pyramid, Aztec warriors forced each captive down onto the sacrificial altar, a curved stone designed specifically to arch the chest upward and open the rib cage. Multiple warriors held the captive down by the limbs. The high priest then used an obsidian blade, and obsidian, sharper than surgical steel, would have cut through flesh almost instantly, to open the chest in a single practiced motion. The heart was removed while it was still beating, held up toward the sun, placed in a stone vessel called the Coaxicali. Then the body was kicked down the pyramid steps. And while this happened, all 68 times, one after another, without pause, the drums kept beating. The Aztec crowd below kept up their ceremonial noise, chanting, the sound carrying across the lake to where the surviving Spanish soldiers were watching from a distance they couldn't close. Díaz wrote that they could see the white skin of their companions in the torchlight as they were brought to the altar, that they recognized some of them, that they could hear the drums and the celebration and couldn't do anything except keep retreating into the dark. 68 times, the same altar, the same drums, the same bodies tumbling down the steps. The Aztecs weren't being cruel by their own understanding. This was the highest religious honor a captured enemy warrior could receive. The sun demanded blood to keep rising. These men were feeding a god. But for the Spanish soldiers watching from across the water, none of that theology was visible. All they could see was their companions disappearing at the top of a pyramid and not coming back down the same way they went up. Díaz said it was the worst night of the entire conquest, and he survived a lot of nights.